The Smurg by Jessiy. Read by LMX Mabella. Chapter 15. "What would you do if I stopped?" Gellert whispered, leaning against the doorframe to her home. Hermione paused, one hand on the doorknob, the other laid flat on the center of the sun-heated wood. "I could give it all up, stop the war, give up my most trusted generals, and I would do it in a heartbeat if it meant that you could love me in return and be with me. To marry me." "Don't you think it's a little too late for that now?" Hermione said, more devastated than she let on. She wanted what he offered. She wanted it so very badly, but she had to be strong. Ever since the very first moment she had asked him to give it all up, and he hadn't. "Don't say that," he begged, reaching out for her. His hand paused, a finger's length away, and he curled his fingers in on themselves, making a white-knuckled fist. Gellert let his arm drop back to his side. "Don't tell me I'm too late." "I don't believe that you can stop, and even if you did, you should pay for the crimes you committed in the name of a greater good. You will be imprisoned for the rest of your life. There can never be a future between us. Not now, not ever. Even—" Words failed her for a moment, and she swallowed down her wants and desires, choking back the tears that threatened to spill. "Even if I wanted one," she finished in a small, quiet voice. "And if I didn't end up in prison, what if I came to you a free man?" "If you came to me a free man, already having faced justice, I would be an old woman, possibly married to someone else." "What if I came to you in 6 months? What would you say to me then?" "You tease me. I'm in agony. You aren't the only one who fell in love, Gellert. You're not the only person suffering. I just respect myself too much to take the breadcrumbs you were offering." "Just give me 6 months. If I let you down or disappoint you, I will never ask it of you again. Just please give me time to clean house, and I will come to you again, heart in hand as a free man." "I will believe it when I see it," Hermione said, pushing open the door and hurried through, shutting the heavy wood in his face. Hermione leaned against the door and finally let the tears fall. How dare he tempt her? How dare he? Hermione covered her face with his hands and sobbed, glad for once that Merope and Tom were with Albus. Hermione woke up in a cold sweat, breathing heavily. A sob caught in her throat as she tried to shake off the overwhelming feeling of heartbreak. It wasn't real. None of that was real, even as some words were. But that didn't stop the anger she felt for Grindelwald, the fear of hearing not one piece of news in over 5 months. It wasn't very often that the feeling she experienced in a dream bled over into a waking life, but it did happen occasionally. And this dream seemed to be one of those occasions. She could have choked on the need that swamped her. Desperately, she wanted to know something, anything about what was going on with Grindelwald, but despite all of her efforts to find out information, nothing. Not one scrap of news. Albus had also tried to find out, and she had a sneaking suspicion that he knew more than he was telling her. He would give her looks sometime. A pitying look that she ignored and definitely did not appreciate. Breakfast was one of Hermione's favorite times of the day. For 2 hours, Tom would be in her care, allowing Merope to catch up on sleep or bathe or just have a moment to herself. And it allowed Hermione to cuddle and adore Tom. Tom was the most charming baby. He would gurgle up to her as if they were having a conversation, his big blue eyes focused on her lips as she talked to him. And he was fascinated by her, always touching her hair and face as if memorizing her. He rarely cried, and for a newborn was oddly content. Hermione was just fascinated with him as he was of her. She couldn't help but fall in love with him. Today was no different. Hermione walked into the breakfast room and Merope happily handed off her son, fleeing the room almost as if she were afraid Hermione would cancel on her. Not that she ever had or would. Tom babbled in her arms happily as Hermione sat at the table. Jasper had her breakfast hot and ready for her. She wasn't quite sure how he did it. She never saw him pop into the room, nor did she see the food appear on her plate like at Hogwarts. It was always right there, magic-free, waiting. Perfect, each and every morning. She took a bite of her toast, slathered in a raspberry preserves, and chuckled as Tom reached out to grab it. "You can't have this yet, silly boy," she cooed, holding the food out of his reach. His outreached fingers opened and closed into and out of fists, brow crinkled in concentration. It did happen from time to time that the child would grow annoyed that being denied something made him petulant, but so far no magical outburst happened. But it would, and Hermione had no doubt that it would happen soon. "You know what we are going to do today, Tom?" Hermione said, smiling down at the infant. "I talked to your mummy last night. I'm going to take you to the neighborhood I grew up in. Let's explore together and see what kind of changes are there." Tom babbled in response and shoved his baby fingers in Hermione's mouth. Hermione pretended to eat them, giggling to herself. "Morning, Hermione," Albus said, walking in. "Morning," Hermione chirped. He dropped a kiss to Tom's baby soft black hair and sat next to Hermione. "Does Merope know you are here yet?" Hermione asked between bites of toast. "No, she was sleeping when I flew in. I didn't have heart to wake her." "Or the balls," Hermione said in a high, smiling voice to Tom. "Anyway," Albus ploughed on, "I wanted to talk to you and see if you would have Tom for the whole day and night. I have a surprise for Merope." She leaned in conspiratorially. "Do I get to be in on the surprise?" He leaned in too, whispering. "Only if you can keep a secret." "I'm very good at secrets." "I booked us a reservation at Fromage, the new wizarding spa in Paris. I could always send her with you if you would rather not have the baby all day and into the night, but I had hoped to make this special for us." "Why, Albus," Hermione said, grinning, "it looks like it just might be a romantic." "Of course I am. Romance does not just depict a woman's heart. All men should know how to keep their women happy. That means giving loving attention even when the passion recedes." "Has the passion receded?" "No, but someday it will, and I want to set a damn good example for Tom. Show him what it means to be married. The commitment is not just words, not just sharing a life. It is about constantly giving your spouse a reason to keep saying yes. In 50 years, if I drop down on one knee to propose again, I want her immediate answer to be yes. Always yes. Today, tomorrow, and forever." "That is a rather unrealistic view of marriage. There are always hard times when divorce seems like the only option." "And I want to always think that no matter how bad it gets, I will always be in her corner. I won't give up on her or walk away. We will fight. We will regret our words. There will be apologies and forgiveness. There will always be love." "You love her?" Hermione asked, softness creeping into her questioning gaze. "For some time now," he replied. "I'm so happy for the both of you," Hermione said sincerely. "You were right. Love can grow in the darkest of places." "I don't recall saying that." "You haven't? Not yet, but you will." He laughed loud and fully, throwing his head back. After some time, his boisterous laugh settled into a content chuckling. "You know, Hermione, I can go days, no, weeks, forgetting that you are from the future. You fit in so well here with us. It's hard to remember all that you have been through." "Don't be an ass. You of all people would never forget such a juicy piece of blackmail." "And yet I do. You know me better than even Aberforth, and I consider you my sister-in-law, close as I imagine I would have been to my sister had things been different," she finished for him, knowing Ariana's attack at 6 had changed everything for the Dumbledore family. "Exactly. This is like my second chance," said quietly, as if she wasn't meant to hear the last part of his statement. She let that pass without commenting, thinking of the broken man who Harry had told her about that drank the potion in the cave. She had no doubt that his greatest regret was that night, the night Ariana died. "I'll gladly take him for as long as you need. Spend the weekend if she can bear to be away. Just make sure she leaves enough milk with the house elves. Lord knows I wouldn't want to apparate in the middle of your sexy time." Dumbledore smirked. "I will see to it and let you know our choice." Hermione nodded awkwardly, dabbed at the corner of her mouth while still holding Tom, trying to clean herself of breakfast. "Leave a note with Kinder. Tom and I are going on a field trip. Tell Merope I love her and to have a good time." Dumbledore nodded and turned his attention back to his breakfast, single most favorite meal of the day. "Let's get ready, my love," Hermione cooed to Tom. Tom merrily blinked at her, his lids taking longer and longer to open between each moment. His pink lips opened wide in a little mew of a yawn. Hermione sat Tom in the middle of her bed, making a square blockade out of pillows so he couldn't inadvertently roll off the bed and hurt himself. Then she set to work, dressing and packing a small bag of necessities. "We are going to have so much fun, Tom," Hermione said in a cheerful voice. "I'm going to show you all the places my dad took me as a little kid. They are probably not the same or not even built, but that's okay. Then I'm going to take you to Wool's, the orphanage you grew up in, the first time. And we're going to make it a yearly visit, bringing those Muggle children a little hope and light in such dark and desperate times. In your name, I will provide an education to any and all children who are wards of the place. Might as well start today. Then after that, we are going to Godric's Hollow. I'm going to show you Harry's house, the one that changed your life and his in my timeline. Then we are going to find you some friends. By Merlin's notes, you will need them, even if you are Dumbledore this time around." She looked back at Tom, who was busy kicking and sticking out his tongue, and smiled. "You know, I didn't think I would be able to love you even as a baby, but I really can't help it. You're such a happy baby, so contented. Makes me wonder if it was changing the way you were conceived and born, or if the way you are being cared for. There is so much love for you, Tom, so much. And I think out of everyone past, present, and future, Harry would be the happiest to see it. He never did want to be in the limelight or your enemy. He just wanted a family who loved him. And he would want that for you too." Tom gurgled and flipped to his stomach. Hermione clapped, laughing happily. He looked so pleased with himself. He lifted his head just high enough to peek at her over the pillow blockade and smiled. Her heart melted all over again. Once she was done gathering everything they would need for the day, she changed Tom's nappy and then wrapped him against her in a white, sturdy cotton cloth. She didn't know if it was strictly the fashion in time, but it was something that had been done for hundreds of years. Maybe it would be revived as women saw her doing it. Or maybe they would turn up their noses and throw tomatoes. She would find out. She draped the smaller cotton cloth over his head and stepped into the flue, tossing the emerald powder into the grate. "Fulgurium Emporium," she said wistfully. It was the nearest magical shop to the home she grew up in, and since it had been in business for over 500 years, she knew that it would be there in her current time. It also had a back room that was original to the building that had never been used. She asked about it once, and the owner had implied it was a point for time travelers to pop in and out of, a singular constant in a fast-changing world. She rolled her eyes then. Funny how things change.
"Can I help you, missus?"
A high, nasally voice asked, eyeballing both her bare ring finger and the baby strapped to her breast. "Hermione Slytherin and my nephew, Tom Dumbledore. We are on a very exciting adventure, and I had been told that this is the closest I could flew to our destination. I was also told we could purchase a picnic basket. Is that true?" She pulled the protective cover over Tom's head and stuffed a scrap into her bag.
"What would you like in it?"
the man asked, waving Hermione to follow him behind into the main shop. Surprise me."
"For how many?"
Just me. Tom here's too young yet."
"Right,"
the proprietor said, as if he could care less. Several minutes later, he placed a small wicker basket on top of the counter.
"That will be 7 tickets and 3 nuts."
Hermione counted out the proper change and shrunk the basket, gingerly placing her purchase at the top of a very sketchy pile of books that may or may not topple before they reached the park her parents used to picnic at. "Thank you," she said over her shoulder, but the man had already left the counter, nowhere in sight. She sighed. Was kindness dead? Sometimes she thought some people would rather die than be civil. She stepped out of the shop and saw a familiar sight. The old post office sat in the corner, obviously a recently added addition to her hometown. She had been in and out of that building more times than she could count. "When I was a little girl," she said to Tom, "my mum would take me to the post office to buy stamps for all the invoices she sent out once a month. It was old then, crumbling, and in some serious need of repair. It's quite novel to see it shiny and new." Hermione began strolling down the main street of the small town. Trees that lined the sidewalk were still fairly young and slightly dense, a throwback to Victorian England. In her time, the trees would be thinned and trimmed. This looked almost wild in an orderly way. Nostalgia settled in her gut. The weather was unreasonably warm for March. The warm wind blew tendrils of Hermione's hair around her face, and the combination of the air and Hermione walking lulled Tom to sleep. Every once in a while, Hermione would stroke his fluffy black hair. When she reached the end of the block, she turned left and followed the street until she was about halfway. An old Victorian row house sat across from her, dilapidated. It was empty and condemned. Someday a mega company would come in and level the building, making way for the suburban homes they would build to attract higher middle-class families, bringing life into the dying town. My parents bought our home when they were just newlyweds. It was the only home we had ever lived in. I scraped my knees on the sidewalk, carved my name into the tree in the backyard after I saw my older cousin do it at Nana's house. My dad would lay out blankets on the lush grass, and the three of us would lay down and watch the stars, Mum pointing out the constellations. Dad swore he could see them, but when Mum wasn't looking, he would ask me to point them out to him again. This is the house I grew up in, my shelter from mean muggle children, my refuge from difficult years at Hogwarts, my greatest pain when I erased it all. I desperately hope you will never know the pain that I had to go through, but even more important, I hope you never cause it, she finished softly to the sleeping Tom's head. Excuse me? A familiar yet imposing voice said from just behind her, a little too close, making Hermione jump at the sudden unexpected intrusion. She turned around, wand in her hand, eyes narrowed, ready to fight and die if needed. It was the same aura that had arrested Grindelwald, the severe, cocky one, but now his hands were in the air, his eyes slightly panicked, not having expected her to move so far. What do you want? Hermione asked, pursing her lips. He may have done what she had wanted in arresting Gellert, but he couldn't quell the resentment in his interrupting their moment. He smiled nervously and lowered his hands, keeping a keen eye on her wand, which he did not lower, not even an inch. She supposed fighting against the Ministry was ingrained now. Hermione Slytherin? He asked. Yes. He reached into his robe and pulled out a huge manila envelope, thick and heavy, and handed it to her. You have been served. With a twist, he was gone. Only the echoing of their ruined brick homes marked his disapparition. Hermione clenched her teeth and looked down at the parcel, wondering what Gellert Grindelwald did, because surely whatever was in his package was his fault. Got to be kidding me, she grumbled, flipping the thing over and ripping it open at the flap. She pulled out a thick pile of documents with a fluorescent pink sticky note attached. Review and sign. Love, Gellert. If fire could have exploded out of her ears in a physical manifestation of her fury, it would have. Her eyes began to twitch. She began clenching and unclenching her teeth, a sign betrayed only by the flexing muscle in her jaw. After staring at the bundle with far too much anger far too long, Hermione shoved it all back in the envelope and put it in her bag. The first official Tom and Hermione outing was ruined. Deciding to cut her losses, she hightailed it back the way she came. At least Merope had a day full of indulgence ahead of her. Tom and Hermione would have just to spend their day in the sitting room, reading and playing. Hermione supposed that wasn't such a hardship. Well, Tom, I guess we ought to go and untangle this mess Uncle Gellert put us in, she murmured absent-mindedly, as she smiled and waved to the lady leaving the old post office. And if we're lucky, maybe I can talk to your mummy into letting me take you to Wool's tomorrow. No one was in Emporium when she returned. Shrugging, she moved through the store and back through the flue, landing in her sitting room a lot earlier than she ever anticipated. Unwrapping Tom was easier said than done. She cradled his body and picked at the knot, holding him with the other hand, thinking of how unfair it was that wrapping him may be a one-person job, but unwrapping him was definitely for two. For several moments she considered never unwrapping him, or at least until Merope and Albus arrived back home. But her unpleasant image of a teenage Tom strapped to her breast made her intensify her efforts, as irrational as such a thought was. Despite the jostling, murmured curses, and frustrated threats at the knob, Tom didn't wake from his snooze. It was an unintentionally added bonus. And if it took nearly 10 minutes to free herself, she would never admit it, especially when she remembered that she was a witch and had a wand in her pocket. Finally, she laid Tom on the blanket she had spread on the floor and said a few interesting things on the perimeter in case he woke. Groaning, Hermione plucked at her shirt where he had drooled, leaving a rather large wet mark in a very unfortunate place. With a shrug, she dismissed it and sat down with a relieved sigh on the couch, pulling her beaded bag on her lap. First, she pulled out an uneaten picnic and set it on the side table. Then she pulled out papers she had been served and set them on the cushion next to her. One by one, she pulled out the contents of the basket, happy exclamations leaving her lips. There was a small meat pie, a fruit salad, assorted cheeses, scones, jams, and several tiny Victoria sponges. Shrewdly, she realized that there was way too much for only one person and wondered suspiciously if the wizard of the Emporium thought she had lied to him. There was enough for two, and she wrinkled her nose as she pulled out a bottle of white wine and 2 glasses. He had packed her enough for an assignation. She didn't know whether to praise him for his direction or be bitter that he imagined her love life to be better than it actually was. Thinking of love life, she gave the stack of papers a side-eye, wondering once again what she was in for. It couldn't have been good. If it had, they would have talked to her or brought her into the ministry, but they hadn't. They had served her in a very legal manner, made her nervous to see the ministry actually following the letter of law. Corrupt officials she could handle, or as fastidiously doing their job. It threw her off balance. She packaged the bottle of wine back into the basket and stowed the lot into her bag. She would have that later, when she was alone and not in charge of Tom. She picked up a small cube of cheddar and popped it into her mouth, savoring the sharp creaminess. Cheese had always been something of a weakness. Wiping her hands on one of the napkins provided, she picked up the papers and began to read. And the more she read, the more confused she became. Then she hit page 3, 4th paragraph, line 72. And all of the informant's intelligence has been utilized to full and satisfying effect, allowing us henceforth, called the Ministry, to capture and dismantle all dark dealings that revolted around the movement henceforth called the Revolution. In the course of disbandment, other illegal and haunted operations and organized criminals have been captured and moved to the guarded parts of Azkaban prison. As agreed in Section 10, the informant, henceforth known as Grindelwald, will be released into the willing custody of one Hermione Slytherin and shall be housebound for a term of no less than 5 consecutive years, with the exception of extreme circumstances that shall be approved at the discretion of his probation officer, which will be assigned to him by the Wizengamot. As previously agreed, all nations and councils shall abide by the final ruling of the Ministry, disallowing appeals of all listed war crimes. See page 52. "Oh, shit," Hermione said to the silent room, mind whirling. He said he had an ace up his sleeve, but she never imagined he would escape having to do any time in prison. And then again, the Ministry must know that holding him in a cell was futile. She imagined that they gave him what he wanted to get what they wanted, and all she had to do was sign on the dotted line. To be continued. Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Smurg by Jessiy, read by Ella Max Mabella. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, AO3, Instagram, or Tumblr.